Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from the Spinetinglers series, and it's book number 7, Snow Day. Off the bat, in case you haven't read Spinetinglers before, this series is one of the Goosebumps knockoff series from the 1990s. It ran for 30 books, and each book is pinned by an author called M.T. Coffin, which is supposed to insinuate an empty coffin, get it? And each book is ghost written by various authors. So in this series, you cannot like one book and then you can love another one. And I love that about this series and like series like Ghosts of Fear Street, where different authors can sometimes bring different writing flares or something different to the table, maybe idea wise or whatever, theme wise, that can make some books stand out over the others. This book I actually read last year. I read this one right around the holidays, but my holiday schedule got all sorts of busy. I was planning on doing a review on it. I had a thought to give it a 5 out of 5. And as time went on, I just kind of skipped over it and said, hey, I'll get back to this next year. So I reread it for this review. And I have to say, this is one of the times where after rereading something, sometimes books can depreciate. And this happens with movies too a lot with me. To me, I often find better resonance with movies I start out not liking as much, but then they grow on me more. And sometimes, like in the case here, you can really like something or think you'll love something after a first read, but then it can get worse, or vice versa. Enough of the tangent here, but what I'm trying to say is this book kind of went down for me. And I'll get into why near the end, but it's still a really solid book. Off the bat, if you love I Live in Your Basement from Goosebumps, and you love movies like The Shining, Inception, you like David Lynch movies, art house horror, stuff like that, maybe you like Twin Peaks by David Lynch, this book kind of feels like if you took Twin Peaks and The Shining and a little bit of, Don't Go to Sleep from Goosebumps and like put them in a blender, that's what you get here. But not in the way that you would think. I think if I Live in Your Basement is one of your top 5 favorite Goosebumps books and you have not tried a Spinetinglers book, this is the one you should try. But other than that, if I had any adjectives for it, I think this book is very ambitious. It did come out, I think, a full year before I Live in Your Basement came out. So it was kind of one of the first, if not the first, kids' horror book to kind of venture down this meta aspect, that some stories in the kids' horror genre can do sometimes. You don't see them too often. And this book is very meta, just so you know. But this is a wild time, and I definitely think it holds up on a reread for a lot of reasons, and I'll get into that in the review portion at the end of the video. But in the broad sense, I highly recommend people try this book out in the Spinetingler series. I don't know if it'll make you a fan by starting here. I don't know if you wanted to try some other books and then try this, it might hit better. I don't know. Just take it at a leisure. But let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So, this story is very intricate and complex, so I'm going to try to keep it surface level as much as possible, okay? So the main character is this character named Debbie. And the first chapter throws you into this meta aspect that this book can bring, and it's a dream sequence of the end of the world coming. The sky is falling. They use this term called the cats in the cradle. The cat being this meteor or this asteroid that's separated from the belt, and the cradle, which is the the atmosphere of Earth, and the meteor's coming, and the end of the world is coming near. But it's all a dream, and Debbie's dream kind of kicks off the story. She kind of goes into, well, let me explain this. The book is told in third person from the author, and trying to explain this in third person can be kind of challenging sometimes, especially when you're going into a meta story. And I'll get into that near the end of the video, but this is kind of a drawback throughout this book, but you got to go with it to enjoy the story. So Debbie, after having this dream, wakes up, and it's 2 days before Christmas. And she's stressed out that she has to do this math test at school. And she doesn't want to go to school, hoping that the snow that's projected will cancel school that day. But she knows that she's not allowed to miss school because her father, grew up. She's a military brat. Her father moved them to this town in Pennsylvania because he's a career militiaman, and he's like a no nonsense type of guy. So even if it's snowing, there's no chance that they're gonna let her off the hook and just stay home and enjoy the snow. So they tell her to get ready, get dressed and go to, get ready to hop on the bus and head to school. So she does that, and she gets picked up from her bus driver, who's called, I think it's called Mad Milo. That's what the kids have nicknamed him, because he's not all there in the head, and he has kind of like a split personality. He's like mostly happy or sad. That's like all he ever is. And when she gets on the bus, she sees very few kids. She sees maybe one or two, and then they go and hop on the route to pick up the other kids. And it's just about 6 of them and the bus driver. And as they're driving down the road, the blizzard, the snow that's forecast has turned into a blizzard, and the snow's starting to pile up on the road. It's getting kind of dangerous. And then over on the radio, when they're listening to the radio as they're heading to school, there's an announcement saying that school was canceled in her county. So everybody's cheering, and Milo's like, okay, well, let's turn around and let's take everyone back home. But when Milo he picks a spot in the middle of the road. Now, mind you, the setting of this story, they're kind of like in the back road country portions of Pennsylvania somewhere. So he tries to turn around in the middle of a road, 2-lane highway, and trying to turn, he gets his wheels caught up in some snow, and then puts too much power on it, and then the bus ends up down in an embankment into a ditch. Now, as this is happening, the kids start to kind of panic, and they realize that they're stuck, but they try to make the best of it, and Milo apologizes to them all, and you kind of get this sense that Judy and the other kids are, kind of worried, but they have food, they have heat in the bus, and there's tunes, and there's a radio. They can try to radio back to the dispatch. So, kind of run down some of the kids, because this is kind of important to run down. There's a few characters. There's one guy named Carl. He's a nice guy, and Debbie may or may not have a crush on Carl. And then you have this jerk guy named Larry, who's, he's a pompous kid. He thinks he knows everything. He has a snarky attitude, makes fun of everyone. You just don't like him, but his banter is really funny at points. Then you have this like nerdy kid named Tommy. He's very quiet. He doesn't talk a lot. He might as well not even be in the story, but he's just there. And then you have this girl named Cindy, and this other girl named Andrea, the Fritch. That's what they call her, because her last name is Fritch. And these kids, as the bus, is in the ditch, everybody eats, people are reading, everybody, Larry's doing his thing, being a jerk, but people start nodding off to sleep. And I think you see, like, Cindy go into a dream where, there's dream sequences of one of the kids, I think it might have been Tommy or Carl, that, they're part of this lizard people invasion, kind of from like H.G. Wells novels, and they live in this world where like these dragon-like god creatures have humans in their households. It's very bizarre. And then there's another dream of, I think it was Cindy's dream, where she's like in a naval battle on the seas, and in both dreams Debbie is there trying to take their arm and take them out of the dreams. And there's this concept called enforced dreams that Debbie and Cindy have, and they kind of know what they're talking about but don't at the same time. And they're like, oh, these are the type of dreams that you can kind of control. These are the dreams that you know are dreams and you can escape from them. And that kind of plays on later in the story. Well, at one point, after doing this a couple times, it's revealed that all the kids went to sleep, seemingly at once. And when they wake up, Milo, the bus driver, is telling the kids that they need to evacuate the bus because there's potential carbon monoxide poisoning that could be going on in the bus. So all the kids leave, and Larry's complaining and whining, saying, hey, look, we don't even have our stuff. It's freezing out here. We're going to have to walk in the snow. Why don't we just go back on the bus, grab our stuff, maybe roll down some windows, and try to turn the bus back on so at least we have some heat. We're not going to get carbon monoxide poisoning if we have the windows rolled down. So Milo agrees, tries to turn on the bus, but they can't get it to start. So Larry, of course, starts busting the chops of Milo, and he does this throughout the story. And he's like, you know what, you got us into this pickle, Milo. Now try to get us out of this. And Milo's like apologizing, and he's like, well, I don't know what to do. The radio's not working. They tried radioing before, and they couldn't get through. And I think it was Andrea. No, it wasn't Andrea. I think it was Debbie and Carl and Larry that say, hey, why don't we go try to find the nearest place that might have a phone, and we can call and tell people that we're all right. So Milo agrees, and they all head and brave the blizzard going on. They walk down the road, and then they hit this dead-end part of the road, and they all freak out, but they see a farmhouse over out in the field, kind of out of ways, but they know there's a straight shot there. They see lights on, and I think the kids describe that they drive by this house on their bus route to go to school every day. So the kids head to this house, and it's revealed to be this museum, this maze museum, owned by somebody presumably from the town. And it says, keep out, nobody allowed entry, we're closed forever. But since it's a snowstorm and they're about to freeze to death, and there's this whole concept that Robert Hawks tries to introduce about talking about hypothermia, and see this commentary with Larry talking about hypothermia and how when you shiver, it's just your brain panicking because it knows your body's about to die. And then when you chatter your teeth, that means that it's even more scared than it was when your body was shivering, type of stuff. But typical Larry. But they arrive at the house, and they decide to go in anyway. But there's something that seems to be off going on with Debbie. She starts to slip in and out of dream consciousness and reality, and she can't really pinpoint what's going on. Like right before she gets into the house, I think she has an episode where she's in a dream, and then she comes out of it, and then they're magically in the house. And Debbie's kind of freaked out because she thinks that maybe hypothermia is kicking in and causing her to get this cabin fever. And cabin fever is also explored by Hawks in the book, talking about how people in like cold, desolate climates, the cold gets to them, they feel isolated, and it makes them go crazy over time. And she was under the impression that it could take maybe months or years to do this, for this cabin fever to set in. But she's like, can it set in this quick? Am I going crazy or something? And while in the house, they notice that there's heat on, so they kick off their coats, kick off their shoes, and they go meet up in this living room area. It's a very old house. They notice a phone. They try to get it to work, but they just can't seem to get it to work because it's a very, very, very old phone from the turn of the century. It's not plugged up properly. So Milo takes it upon himself to try to fix that. And the kids are getting kind of hungry. So they decide to go try to look for some food. So they head off into this kitchen area, and they notice this door. And Larry opens the door, and it's this freezer. And he tries to pull open the freezer, but what happens is that every single kid goes into what Debbie was experiencing before. They go into these like lucid dreams, but it feels real to them. And for a brief moment, everybody's in these dreams, and then they all kind of simultaneously snap out of it. And none of them can remember what they saw in the freezer. They saw the freezer door opening, which triggered this. And then now they're like, okay, well, what was in the freezer, Larry? Because Larry seems to be the only person that it didn't happen to, but Larry just denies that this happened to him. So, freaked out, the kids try to go back and find Milo, and Milo kind of has had enough. He's like, you guys need to calm down and sit in this room and just relax. And then the power goes out, which stresses them all out. Milo gets candles and tries to assure them to stay in the room until they can find a way to get the phone to work. But now that the phone can't work, they're just going to have to wait it out. And it's getting dark outside. And then all of a sudden, one of the kids, I think it was Andrea, goes missing. And all their, Andrea goes missing, and they can't seem to find Andrea. And they decide to split up. Half of them are going to go to the basement, and then Debbie's like, you know what, I'm going to go check upstairs. And when Debbie goes to check upstairs, this is where the story gets really weird. So she gets she realizes that this house is kind of a fun house, and I don't want to spoil this element with this painting when they walk in, but it seems like there's a cat in the painting, and the staircase leads to nowhere type of painting. It was very bizarre. This house was described as a maze house, so it's kind of like a trick fun house type of thing. So she goes up these stairs and realizes that it's a stairway to nowhere. And she kind of falls down this trap door, when she's carrying a candle, right? And she's led into this crevice surrounded by walls that can't be moved. It's all trick rooms that this home apparently has. She starts to kind of panic a little bit. And she starts to worry about oxygen running out because the candle's burning up all the oxygen. And then she slips into a dream again. And in this dream, she sees her teacher Milo, or bus driver Milo, and she's like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "Oh, this is a dream. We got to get out of here." So when she gets out of the dream, she wakes up in a bed surrounded by candles in a weird, odd room, and it has a closet, but a few doors that seem to go to many places. Some may go to nowhere, some may go back to the hallways, and she can't seem to find where she's at in the house. She's calling for help, she's calling for her friends, nobody's answering. So she goes into the closet, and she's trapped in the closet, and she sees a door, and she heads into the door, and she finds that there's this little hallway in the house that can go in through the house, that can peer into each room, spy on people, and there's a little noose hanging in there, kind of tying back to another thing happening early on in the bus. When they were stuck in the bus earlier, they were talking about playing a game called Hangman, which is like a game where you draw a hangman, and then you try to write down lines for each letter of a word, and you have to guess letters, and every letter you guess wrong, you have to draw the head, the neck, the body, and once you draw the whole body, you'll lose. So, thinking back on that, she goes, well, this is odd. And she ends up finding her way somehow back to the room. And she's trying to find a way out, but she sees this diary there. And it says, you need to, why don't you just listen to your dreams? Why can't you pick a dream? She's like, who is this? Why am I being sent this message? Like, what about my dreams? And she kind of lingers with that question and enters back in the hall, finds herself back in a hallway through this other door that leads to the entryway, and she sees Milo walking around, and she kind of realizes, oh, this house is like a fun house. They have like fun mirrors. Everywhere you look, there's something different. She looks over at the painting, the cat's in a different position. But then she looks over at the coat rack, and all the shoes are missing. All the coats are missing. And she's like, okay, well, this is weird. All the kids are gone. She's by herself. She's isolated. And she goes into another dream. Now, this is where it gets weird. So, in this dream, Milo is there, And then she tries to pull Milo out of the dream. She's like, Milo, this is just a dream. And Milo's like, no, you don't get it. So when she pulls out of the dream this time, Milo is there. But there's also another Milo and a third Milo later on. And this is where the story gets like off the walls crazy. So it's revealed that essentially Debbie, I don't know if I've been calling her Judy the whole video, but Debbie has been experiencing these dreams for a reason. And these dreams may or may not be involved with time travel and reality and the future of mankind. And her contribution to mankind in the future requires her to pick a dream that she wants to live in for eternity, because she can live in dreams forever. She doesn't have to stay in the physical realm, because her physical body is needed more for this medical research that these time travelers are after her and her friends for. So the most stark thing about this reveal is that this house that they're in is like this headquarters for this, time traveling operation, and that Milo, Mad Milo, and all these different Milos are from different times of Milo's life and throughout history that have come back in time to his grandmother's house, who built this house that went mad because her husband, was a hangman back in the day. He hung people. And she went crazy and built all these secret rooms, and they decided to use this house as a state, because nobody would ever think that this house had real rooms or anything, and they can use it to save mankind in the future. It's very bizarre, but that's essentially what the story is trying to say. So Debbie doesn't accept this, and Debbie's like, you know what? I don't want to live in dreams. I don't agree with what you guys are doing, but they say that she has really no control over it. So she starts going into more dreams, in and out of reality. There's a time jump where 19 years in the future, she's now in the beginning of the story, she's 12 or 13, and now she's in her early 30s, and she realizes that, this house has kept her, as a captive for many years, and will keep doing so throughout time, and she has no real control over it unless she can convince them to let her go. So she keeps trying to urge them, just let me go. I don't want to do this. They're like, well, we're going to give you as many chances as you need until you find the right reality that you want to live in your dreams. Well, she keeps fighting and putting up a fight, and she keeps ending back in square one with these Milos, like triplets, the three Milos from different time periods, until an older Milo comes out of nowhere and rescues her and frees her out of, well, I don't want to spoil what happens here specifically, but I'll just tell you, this older Milo comes and tries to free her and everybody else from what's going on. And to Debbie, she feels like her reality's given back. She gets to go back home, gets to enjoy her snow day and enjoy her Christmas. But when she gets back to school, she's taking her test, and then she thinks back on it, and thinks back on the reality that she's in, and kind of questions if her reality is a trick or really real, and that's where the story ends. It's a very complex and convoluted story. I try to keep it as surface level as possible, y'all. It's very confusing. When you read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about, okay? But I skimmed over a lot of details. The book is very detailed. Go experience it if you want a little bit more. But let's start off with the positives with this book, because this one is a whirlwind. Off the bat, Debbie as a main character, she has some layers explored throughout the book, not explicitly, because for the most part, her hobby, she's a poet. There's this poet nature, not only with her character, but with the narrator. There's a third person narrator here that randomly goes into rhyming too, and I'll get into that in just a minute when I get to the negatives. But, her being a poet, her having this part of her personality, her having the background of being a military brat, going to school against her will, having all this stuff going wrong in a day where she really shouldn't have been sent to school in the first place. All these factors outside of her control led to what happened to her that snow day. That's why it's called Snow Day. And as the story goes on, you get kind of a sense of her personality. She doesn't take no for an answer. She's very resilient to get her way, and she seems to want to help the betterment of her friends, even though Larry's not really her friend and some of the other kids aren't her friends. She takes them into account and wants to help them, especially when she realizes the big twist of what's going on inside of this house with them. I didn't spoil a big part of that because it's mind-blowing a little bit, but that's crazy. And I really applaud Debbie's character for that, which goes on to the other characters of the story. This book has a lot of characters, and Robert Hawks, the author, spends a lot of effort and time building character dynamics with these characters, giving them their own distinct personalities, and they really shine through. Unfortunately for characters like Sydney, Tommy, and Carl, I mean, Carl gets a little bit more exposure near the end, but Sydney and Tommy specifically are more like side characters. And then the main three you really have to worry about is like Andrea the Fritch, and then you have Larry, and then Debbie. Larry is a whirlwind because you hate Larry, but you also want to love Larry because of his witty commentary and and like, you know, he's willing to say what other people want to say. He's kind of a jerk, but he's like a funny and, I guess, sympathetic jerk. It's really weird. And some of these other characters, you feel really bad for the bus driver, Milo. But then when the story gets where it goes, it's super bizarre. With 3 Milos time traveling. It's a bizarre concept. Going to another positive with it, the meta aspect gets established from chapter 1, from the get-go. So I love it when meta stories, if a story's gonna do meta, establish it early on so the reader understands that this is a rule to expect. And this book did not waste any time doing that. So after the first 3 chapters, I knew that this was going to be a meta ride, and pretty much anything was on the table as long as it made logical sense. It was fine with me. Now, sometimes that could be a cop-out, and we're going to get kind of that in the negatives here, but for the most part, a lot of this book was logical, and some really wild twists and turns to be had with it in the plot. Nothing really scary here, just mostly creepy. Most of the fun stuff was in this maze house. Had some creepy atmosphere. It's very atmospheric. You felt cold reading this book. You felt like being genuinely trapped inside of a bus, being inside of this house that has no real rooms, and it's just really eerie and creepy and old. It had some serious atmosphere going for it, and the twist to it all was wild. I loved the main twist, and it got kind of dark. Okay. So I tip my hat to it. But for it being, for the most part well written, there are some negatives. I noticed this on the reread this time. There's a good amount of chapters spent inside of the bus dealing with like trying to build these characters, getting to know all 6 of these kids and the bus driver. And I feel like while that's important, that keep them in the bus doing that kind of takes away time from the house, which has all of the interesting aspects of the story in it. I feel like if the kids, when the bus crashes, the bus should have just shut off and they immediately try to leave and go find shelter. And then they find the house, and then the majority of the story takes place in the house. That's what should have happened. I didn't notice it on the first time reading it because it was the first time, of course, but this time I really realized that a lot of the bus stuff and the first third of the book is kind of filler. You can kind of this story is 139 pages. You can probably trim out 15 pages of the bus stuff and an extra dream sequence from these side characters, and you can still get the point across what the story was trying to do without that. So some filler could be trimmed out in the first third. There are some wonky logic stuff dealing with the meta near the end. in the beginning of the story, it was really heavily implied that the story was going into shifting narrative changes between these characters. And I thought that that's what they were going to do. Debbie was just going to be like the main focal character. But they were going to go into Sydney, you're going to go into Carl and all that. And that's what it seemed like. But then later on, there's a reveal about Debbie's dreams that just kind of makes the beginning part of the book feel a little pointless and not, it doesn't really match what the story was insinuating in the early part of the book. And it makes it really confusing. And like the logical choice there just seemed really baffling. And also on top of that, the narration stuff, the narrator of this book, it's told in third person, and randomly, like sometimes he'll start off a chapter because there are chapter titles in this book. Sometimes he'll start off a chapter with a rhyme scheme, and then sometimes when he's just narrating the story throughout, there'll be like 3 to 4 or 5 sentence stretches where it's just nothing but rhyming. like he's trying to be like a Dr. Seuss, How the Grinch Stole Christmas narration style, randomly. And it just comes off weird, and I get they're going for a Christmas vibe. This is a Christmas book, or Christmas time book, but it's just, why? It's an aesthetic choice that makes no sense. It's not like they did this throughout the entire book. It's just randomly, and he does it about like 10 to 15 times. It's just like, it's kind of forced in and kind of cringe. And some of the dialogue and some of the words used, like hoo hee ha, like outdated stuff that they would have said in like Leave It to Beaver, like black and white sitcoms in the 40s, was said by characters like Larry in the 90s. Like, who says that crap? Like, some of the dialogue was really questionable too as well. A lot of the word usage and stuff was just kind of cringe-inducing. But other than that, and you know, I've kind of already brought up, it wasn't really that scary, but I'm not going to deduct any points on it not being scary. It was still creepy and thrilling. Just wasn't as something as masterful as I Live in Your Basement is. To me, I Live in Your Basement is a masterpiece when it comes to this type of storytelling. This is a valiant effort, but just doesn't match up all that well. But it's still a great book. So if I had to rate this thing from a 0 to 5-star basis, I decided, even with those problems being kind of, there's quite a few, they're not that heavy hitting, because where this book has problems, it's like I said, the meta kind of serves as a cop-out for some of those problems. And while that's kind of cheap, it does kind of excuse it. But at the same time, I still want to give this book an A, so it's going to get a 4.5 or higher. And where I settled with this, I decided to bump it up to a 4.6 from a 4.5 and just kind of leave it there. I feel like a 4.6 out of 5 is completely fair for this. It has problems, but it's still a well-told story. It's very thought-provoking, interesting, and I think that this one is definitely revisitable multiple times. Might be an annual Christmas time read. Once I finish all these kids' horror books I want to read, this one probably will be an annual read. So, that's my thoughts on Snow Day. Let me know down in the comment section if you have read this before. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.